Hello, I'm Dr. Pierre Samaan, and it's wonderful being back with you once again. Today we're talking about the 4 Ds leading to depression. We discussed difficulty and discouragement. Today we're starting on distress, which we started on last time, but this is part 2 of distress. There's so much to talk about with distress. It just involves so many things. We all know what it feels like to be in distress. We spoke about the facets of stress last time and the importance that was identified by the researcher Dr. Hans Selye. And as we look into stress over the years and how it affects our bodies now with the technology that we have or that medical science has, we're learning so much more. And I enjoy reading and studying about it because it helps me in learning how I can help others. So when we address distress, we're addressing that place where we hit the wall. We have difficulties, we have hardships. Sometimes it's not so bad. Sometimes things come, there's that pushback that comes against us. And so we see the structure here of the 4 Ds leading to depression, the first being difficulty, then discouragement. When things get a little difficult, we kind of get discouraged if it persists a little bit. And then distress, which is part 2 of what we're talking about today, then despair. And despair leads into depression. And we'll be discussing that at another time. But distress being so encompassing, it's taking us about three parts to complete distress. You hit the wall. And that wall, you don't often feel it other than you want to escape. You don't feel comfortable. These defenses are welling up, and we're going to identify some of those defenses. And we're going to recognize how we can see that sooner than later. If we can catch that soon, rather than wait until we've already escaped to something to help us feel better, or to overcompensate for whatever it is, or to self-medicate, if we can recognize hitting that wall sooner, then we can identify what is making up that wall. What are the layers making up that wall that's preventing us from getting through whatever this difficulty is, whatever this stressor might be. And if we can do that and face it, there's healing. Because when there's healing, it tears down those strongholds of the past that connect with that are making it difficult, that are causing that wall to be in that place where it's preventing us from getting through whatever it is we need to get through, whether it's a relationship or a situation. When we hit the wall, it's just so hard. And then we want to overcompensate in doing things to protect ourselves. And we're going to break that down for you, start to break that down for you today. When we looked at Hans Selye's research the last time, we learned about the stage of resistance. And within the mind, proliferating stress, thoughts, things that build up in our mind, that intensify in our mind, it generates that fight or flight response that we have discussed in the past. It activates the fear and emotion center of the brain. When there's that wall that we hit, the discomfort wells up, and we may not even realize what we're feeling other than, oh, something's not right here. And if we're not careful, we then follow this stage of resistance or general adaptation, Dr. Selye called it, to where we adapt by escaping to whatever's going to help us to feel good, to whatever's going to help us to get through and protect ourselves from the illusion that we're going to be so damaged, there's a serious threat that we may even, if it to the more severe side, we may even cease to exist. It can be that bad for some people. So, born out of that need to self-protect, there's an illusion that we have to protect security, significance, and satisfaction. When we're doing that, we're thinking we're protecting those things, whether it's conscious or not, but it's an illusion. It's really an escape giving us an illusion of protection. It's not real protection. And so it's only satisfying a little bit, may fill a need a little bit, but it empties real quick because it's not what we really need. It's not what's really important. It's not facing that wall that we have to face in identifying what it is and how to deal with it. So the defense mechanisms kick in when we escape, and that it's kind of like, you remember when I'm sure all of you have gone to carnivals or circuses or whatever, and you remember those little games, and even the current game places, that whack-a-mole game, you know, where little mole pops up and you whack it on the head and it goes back down. For every perceived threat or exposure, the distressed person overcompensates to self-protect. And so they got to whack that, whatever it is, that threat. So you have to whack it down. The defenses lead them into identifying those vigorously opposing threats that they see as, oh, you know, this, I got to do this, I got to do that. You do that whack-a-mole game. I remember when I was a kid, maybe 11, 12 years old, I'd walk along the beach. We lived near the beach at the time, in Daytona Beach, and go to the boardwalk and play these games at the boardwalk. My mom would give me, you know, a bunch of quarters and go and play the games. And whack-a-mole was one of them, you know, whack, whack, whack. And where that adrenaline gets going after a little while, it's no different with stress. As the defenses kick in, that adrenaline gets going after a while because the fight or flight system is inflamed. It's irritated. And that just generates more of the adrenaline, the stress hormones flooding through your body. And before you know it, you're in a cycle of defensive posturing. You know, that's what I call it, defensive posturing. Distressed persons cycle into defensive posturing. And we're going to talk about some of those defenses. You'll see some of those defenses in yourself. We all have some of them, but when there's distress, the more severe the distress, the more intense or the more vigorous these defenses are. The first one, of course, is hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is guardedness to all possibilities of perceived threats. And it's often seen as anxiety, worry, nervousness, apprehension, resulting in things like hypertension or high blood pressure, other things as well. A sense of confidence and self-worth is bottoming in that hypervigilance. There's an emptiness inside that gets magnified. I'm uncomfortable, I don't know what it is, there's something not right. You can't quite put your finger on it. And failed relief efforts, you're trying but it's not working. Then exaggerated thinking occurs that can lead to, for some, obsessive compulsive rituals, increased negative thoughts and paranoia. As you increase, as that limbic system is more inflamed and that fight or flight response is more inflamed, you think negatively more often, it creates an obsessive thought pattern which can become compulsive, where now you're behaving, you're carrying out what you're thinking But the negativity now begins to make you feel like people are against you. People are plotting against you. In business, not very good when that happens because you're pushing the very people away that are there to help. You're saying no to just about everything, and if not careful, a downward spiral occurs in business. Then there's emotional attachment. Emotional attachment is a avoidance by keeping others at a distance. And the tendency is to keep others at a distance because you're not sure what they know, you're not sure what's wrong, and it's safer to put a wall up around you, alienate yourself from others, keep yourself safe by keeping them safe distance away. And then usually what happens to do that lashing out occurs. Lashing out at loved ones to self-protect. In Proverbs chapter 9, verses 7 to 8, it says something that's interesting. It says, anyone who rebukes a mocker will get an insult in return. When someone's lashing out, when someone's in this defensive posturing, and you point it out to them, what are they going to do? They're going to rebuke you. They're going to lash out at you. Because as we'll see a little later, they get so defensive that everything is a threat. Even the truth is a threat. And they can't see other than what they want to see. And so they strike back out at you. And here in Scripture, it's telling us that very thing. It goes on to say, anyone who corrects the wicked will get hurt. Now, the word wicked there, it's not meaning a terrible, awful person, but it's meaning if you're correcting someone who is stuck in this mode of distress, then they're going to hurt you. If they're not well-rounded, if they're not dealing with whatever it is, if they're not open to opinions of others, if they're not in this state of distress, then they lash back out at you and hurt you. It goes on to say, so don't bother correcting mockers. They'll only hate you. But correct the wise, and they'll love you. Now, let me emphasize here, that's not saying don't say what's right to a person who's doing wrong just because you think they might hurt you, or just because you think they might lash out at you. But it's saying that's typically what's going to happen if they're not willing to learn and to grow and to accept the fact that they could be wrong on something. And so selfishness is not there. There's a willingness to grow, a willingness to change. And for those individuals, they love your corrections. They love your comments of how to improve something or pointing out something that could be changed for the better. And they thank you for it, and they respect you all the more for it, and they stay your friends as a result of it. When they become increasingly selfish, it's for that need to self-protect. Typically, you'll see certain friends that tend to be that way, where they're just always very defensive, and they are self-protecting. There's a fear of rejection, a fear of looking bad, or a fear of abandonment, or whatever other fears there may be. We've identified many of those things in the love diagram, God's diagram of love, that I did several sessions ago. If you'd like a copy of that, I've had several people ask me for a PDF copy so they could have and pass around. Feel free to email me, and I'll be happy to send you a copy of the love diagram where you can see it more easily. But it's that failure to attach that if that self-protective mode keeps going, it becomes very hard to bond with others. So personal distractions to escape those discomforting thoughts and feelings intensify, they increase. Looking elsewhere, doing other things, staying busy, occupying yourself, instead of facing the problem. We all do that to a certain point, but for those who are doing it all the time, or more often than not, they're not growing. They're not thriving. We want to thrive. We want to do well, and we want to get through these walls, these barriers. Limited variation of emotional responses, which inhibits bonding. So what occurs there in these defenses is happy, sad, hardly nothing in between. One extreme or the other. To the more severe, all or nothing. How can you grow with that? How can you bond with others with that? Whether it's in business, at home, at church, no matter where you are, it's hard to carry on a conversation with someone who is in this defensive posturing, and anything that's said, they take it as wonderful or terrible or awful, and you can't carry out that conversation. In particular in business, something's not going right. You have your coworkers or your assistants who are advising, who are recommending, and all they get back is this animosity, this rejection, this wall of protection. And what do? Why bother? I once had someone many years ago who had a big business, and he was doing that. He would get very defensive, and his assistants and all that would give recommendations, and unfortunately, they didn't know what they were talking about. He would tell them. They weren't smart enough, or this or that, and before you know it, everybody was just sitting back waiting for him to tell them what to do. And the business was spiraling downward, getting out of control. And that's kind of what brought him in. He was afraid. There was a fear there that he was going to lose everything. And he wanted to know what to do about it. And so we identified what was going on in that dynamic, that defensive posturing that was going on. And we recognized its sources by looking back at those, as the Bible calls it, strongholds, those unresolved things of the past. We identified some of the more serious ones, some of the bigger things in his life. There was healing, there was peace, there was understanding. Before you know it, he's now at ease when they're telling him something that he didn't want to hear. You did this wrong, or this needs improving, or if we change this, things would get better over there. And he was able to start receiving those things without getting defensive and attacking back. So more and more his employees began being open and putting that effort to improving things. And the business stopped its downward spiral and began to move back up to where it was originally, and actually increased in many ways. And there's a limited variation when we have this all or nothing emotion. How can we be whole and complete? How can we attach in bonding? How can we get along if that's there? So then comes denial. A lot of you already know what denial is. Coping mechanism to protect oneself from refusing to accept the truth. You know, we hear about denial a lot with addicts, alcoholics, drug addicts, and so on. But denial occurs with just about everybody at some point. Denial is the failure to recognize the truth and receive the truth. It's a refusal, and it's chronic. When it gets chronic, it creates a lot of problems. So faulty thinking, wrong thinking, that's believed to be true. So we grow up in let's say you grow up in a home where you may have a parent who says a certain thing constantly, and that's not true, but that's what the parent believes is true. So the child then takes it on to themselves, assimilates it into themselves, believes it to be true, goes on to life believing that to be true, but he's getting or she's getting all this pushback from others, and it's causing a lot of stress, a lot of distress, problems, so that person begins to justify, rationalize, why is this happening? It can't be me, it must be them. So it's all their fault. I'm right, they're wrong. Well, as they start believing that faulty belief to be true, the more they start believing it to be true, the more it becomes an absolute truth to them, but the truth becomes a lie. They can't see the actual truth. There's a refusal to see the actual truth. And to them, that's a lie. And before you know it, there's what they call sincere delusion. It's actually a delusional state of mind, not facing the reality, thinking things that aren't real, that aren't true. Sincere delusion. That's denial. Not good, but it's a defensive posturing for a lot of people, not even realizing it. Distressed persons in denial will not acknowledge a distressing situation. They'll avoid facing the facts, and they'll downplay possible consequences to a predicament. As they downplay it, then before you know it, it's not there. Now, you don't know what you're talking about, and they avoid you. Well, a few encouraging words to that, and we're going to continue on those the next time, but a few encouraging words for that. We can read a lot of things in Scripture and get a lot of helps from those things, but there's a couple of scriptures here I pulled out. Philippians 4, chapter 6. Says, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Now, you don't have to be a Christian to realize that when there's a problem and you don't have someone to turn to that you can trust, it makes it difficult to process that. And as a faith-based person, whether it's a particular religion or a higher power or whatever it might be, you need that someone or something to believe in. And when I say believe, it's a heartfelt belief that you're being heard, and a heartfelt belief that there's an answer coming, if not already being answered. In Christianity, certainly we believe in God, we believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God, we believe in the Holy Spirit that has come to us in being that conduit between us and God. And we believe that when there's a problem, an anxiousness, a difficulty, a stressor, or when we're in distress, we can ask Him anything. We can convey our thoughts to Him. And it says here, in everything, in prayer, so prayer is just talking to God, and supplication, so, please, sometimes begging. I need your help. I need this. I need that. I need to understand this. I need to figure that out. And thanksgiving. Thanks for the answer. I know you're giving it to me. I'll see it soon, or I'll recognize it when I can in the next few days. Usually it's sometimes right away, sometimes in a few days, sometimes a few weeks down the line, but the answer always comes. And when we can do that, it relieves this worry, it relieves this fear, it relieves the stress. It helps us out of the distress. John chapter 14, verse 27 says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid." So what's he saying there? What is Jesus saying? He has peace. He's the Son of God. God is in him. He's the representation of God. His peace he wants us to have. And so he's passing that along to us as he's teaching us, walking this earth, teaching us these different things, to be an example of God, to recognize, hey, if we do it this way, we'll have that peace. If we do it his way, it works. Common sense. Look at others. Follow what it says. It does work. You want peace? You want to get out of distress? You may not be able to do it all by yourself. Turn to God. Ask him for that help. I challenge you to do that. If you're not sure, hey, try it. What have you got to lose? If you're in a downward spiral of distress, we don't want to get into despair. And so as we see here, difficulty is mild to moderate stress. Discouragement is moderate to severe stress, activating that alarm reaction. Then comes distress, which is what we've been speaking about. Distress is severe stress activating the stage of resistance, or the pushback, the protection, putting up the walls, that defensive posturing. And then the next stage is despair. Uncontrolled stress activating the stage of exhaustion, which leads into depression. Next time we're going to talk a little bit more about distress before we get into despair. So I hope this has helped you in some way. Push that like button down there, subscribe, and if you have questions, email us. We're happy to answer whatever questions you send our way. God bless. See you next time. Bye.